great pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon or this morning, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Khalid Fahmy, and I'm the director of the Center for Islamic Studies here at Cambridge University. And this is the final event in the series of public lectures that the center organizes every other Thursday during term time. So this is the last of this year's events. You can find all our previous lectures recorded on video available to be watched on our website, which is www.CIS, that is Center for Islamic Studies, .cam, that is cambridge.ac.uk. This evening we are celebrating, let me share a screen, and how do we do this? Here. We are celebrating the publication 2 years ago of a landmark publication, landmark book, which is this book in front of you, The Lost Maps of the Caliphs, Drawing the World in 11th Century Cairo, that was co-authored by Yossef Rapaport and Emelie Smith. Initially, when preparing for the event tonight, we had in mind to invite both co-authors, but unfortunately, for family reasons, Professor Savage Smith cannot join us today. Nevertheless, I would like to say a few introductory words about her so that you get a feel for the wealth of knowledge and erudition that went into this publication. Professor Savage Smith is a professor of history of Islamic science at Oxford University. She is a prolific writer of numerous books, scholarly articles, and encyclopedia entries, and I will just mention just a few of her most important publications, again, for you to get a feel of the breadth of her interests. In 2007, she published, together with Peter Pullman, this book, Medieval Islamic Medicine, that for my own work has been really very foundational. In 2013, she and Professor Rapoport published, that's the original, the definitive critical edition of the book that we'll be talking about, the manuscript that we'll be talking about today. This is an 800-page publication by Brill, and as I said, it is the first edited, complete edited study of the 11th century Arabic manuscript that we will be talking about today. In 2018, she published an edited book, Magic and Divination in Early Islam. And then in 2020, this year, a literary history of medicine. Again, it's a first volume of a translation of عيون الأنباء في طبقات الأطباء لابن أبي أصيبع. So again, unfortunately, she cannot join us today, but we are very happy to have the second author of the book, Professor Yossef Rapaport. Professor Rapaport is Professor of Islamic History at Queen Mary University of London. His interests include the social, cultural, and legal aspects of life in the Islamic Arabic-speaking Middle East in the Middle Ages, from about 1000 to about 1500 AD. Specifically, his publications cover the fields of peasants and nomads in medieval Islam, medieval Islamic maps, history of Islamic law, He's on the editorial board of the very important publication, periodical Islamic Law and Society, and Women and Gender of Medieval Islam. Again, some of his publications, again, arranged in chronological order. In 2005, he published Marriage, Money, and Divorce in Medieval Islam, that was translated to Arabic in the same year under this title, الزواج والمال والطلاق في المجتمع الإسلامي في العصور الوسطى. In 2010, this is not a book, but this is an article I use heavily in my publication, well, I quote it in my publications, but I also teach it. It's a landmark study, Royal Justice and Religious Law, CIS and Sharia under the Mamluks. In 2010, he edited with the late Shihab Ahmed this landmark study, Ibn Taymiyyah and his times. It was based on a very important conference held in Princeton. I remember a couple of years earlier. In 2013, again, the book that we mentioned earlier, together with Professor Savage Smith. 2018, the book that we'll be covering today, which is an abridged version of that earlier publication of 2013. And also, and lastly, in 2018, the Royal Economy and Tribal Society in Islamic Egypt, a study of Nabulsi's villages of the Fayoum. So as you could see, a prolific writer with various interests. Today, again, we're very happy to have him, and he'll be talking for about 45 minutes. We will have 2 breaks in the middle of the talk to receive questions. So we will have, and each break we will receive 2 questions. And then, of course, we will open it up at the end of the lecture for a general Q&A. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, there's an icon saying participants. If you press this icon, you can see a button saying raise hand. That is where you indicate to us that you're interested in raising a question. So we will be monitoring this, and we will be calling on you individually to pose your question. So with no further ado, I give it to Professor Rapoport.
Thank you very much, Khaled, for this wonderful introduction. And it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Thank you very much for tuning in. The story of this wonderful manuscript starts with a phone call. It starts with a phone call that my colleague, Professor Emelie Smith, received in late September of the year 2000. And this was a call from Christie's auction house. And they told her that a manuscript that is going to be on sales very soon is being reconsidered because they think they may have underestimated its value. She came down from Oxford to London, and what she saw first was this scruffy cover with a famous bear dropping on it, nothing very special on top. And she opened it, and it had this title, Kitab Gharaib al-Funun wa Mulah al-Uyun, which loosely means the Book of Curious Sciences and Marvels to the Eyes. And as she looked through the text, it was clearly a cosmographical treatise, meaning something treatise on the heaven and the earth, both astronomical and geographical. The paper was clearly old. It was this type of color and type of paper was clearly medieval. But what was unusual about it was a set of images of the stars and of the earth that were unlike anything that she seen before. So she took one image back to Oxford, or took several images, but one was especially intriguing. And this was the image of the largest island of these seas. And what could this be? They pondered over it in Oxford, and they looked at the most visually attractive features, which are on the top. You have on the top the palace of the Sultan with his Abid, with this onion dome shape, onion-shaped dome. You have two towers guarding a port with, they said to be Castle Silsila, chains guarding a chain that would be probably blocking that port, and a Sina and Arsenal at the entry. But which place is it? So as they looked at the labels closely at the gates of that city, this is the gate of St. Agatha. This is the gate of the Sudan, the blacks. This is the neighborhood of the Sakaliba, the Slavs. Only one city fitted, and that is Palermo. So this is Palermo. The red-capped mountain here is Mount Etna. The island, the largest island in the Mediterranean, is Sicily. And this was so critical and so significant for two reasons. First, it shows that this map was made originally before the Norman conquest of Sicily in 1072. So we are talking about a map, a treatise that was written before the end of the 11th century. The other significant aspect was that no one has drawn, there's no other map of Sicily that shows me Sicily in such a way. We all know it's triangle. Why is it shown as an oval? It's so different from any other known representation of Sicily, and one of the earliest representation of Sicily in any known culture. And at that moment, Emelie, she's listening in here, I hope, and her colleagues in Oxford realized that this is a really important manuscript and possibly one of the most important discoveries of an Arabic manuscript in recent decades. And she was determined that this would be publicly accessible, that a public library would buy it, and that it would not be closed behind, be behind closed doors at private ownership. And she managed to convince the keeper of Oriental books in the Bodleian Library to organize a fundraising campaign. And the end, this manuscript was purchased by the Bodleian Library. This was done in 2002 for £400,000, which is probably below its market value. It was only purchased after very thorough legal checks that it is not reported as stolen in any way. There's no mention that it was clear that this is genuine, both by paper, ink. I invested that money. At that point, of course, there was important to see who is the author, but that is never mentioned, and we don't know to this day. And I'll come back to it at the end of the talk. But this, we can know from the references to events in the treatise that it was written after 1020, but before 1050, because the tribe of Banu Qura are mentioned as still living in Alexandria, which is, and they were banished from there by Fatimid Caliphs in 1050. And we also know it must be before 1070, before the Norman conquest of Sicily. The author declares his allegiance to the Fatimid Ismaili Shia Caliphs of Cairo several times. It's very clear that he's a Fatimid supporter. The manuscript that we have, the manuscript that was bought by the Bodleian, is not the original. It was copied around 1200, around the end of the 12th century or the beginning of the 13th, based on paper, ink, calligraphy. And again, this was subject to many checks. During the process of purchasing it, it became apparent that there are other copies of this manuscript, but they have been only partial or unillustrated, and they all date from the 16th or 17th century. So this is an example of one of the wonderful maps that I'll talk about, the map of Mahdia, the first Fatimid capital. So what is it in the Book of Curiosities? First, it's different from earlier geographical texts, such as Istachri or Ibn Hawkal, in that it set out from the start to describe both the sky and the earth. And more than half of the treatise is devoted to the sky. And it starts with this diagram, which is a diagram of the universe. It has the earth in the middle, and it's surrounded by, on the outer rim, the zodiac star constellation, then other constellations, then the lunar mansion or the star group associated with the lunar mansions, and then the earth in the middle. This is the conception of the universe as understood at that time. And then this first half of the book goes through very methodically the fixed star on the outer rim, and then planets closer to Earth, and then comets, and to earthquakes. I will not talk today about the first half, but I would like to say that the astrological worldview that is expressed in the first half, in which every event on the sky affects events on Earth, is very important to the author. It's prevalent throughout probably the society he was living in, Fatimid society, but also may specifically reflect Ismaili esoteric ideas. The second book, On the Earth, is divided into three major parts. The first part has sections that are adaptations from the Greek scientist Ptolemy and the father of medicine Hippocrates, and this part has a map of the world, which I will talk about shortly. The second part has maps of seas, islands, bays, and lakes. There is a logic of water in that part, going through all the major waterways of the world. It also includes a section on how to make maps of the seas. And the third part, which is unillustrated, contains section on marvels and mirabilia of the world, wondrous fishes, so forth. There are many things to talk about in this book, and so I will talk about three elements, and I will stop after the first two sections to collect questions. The first element is the rectangular map of the world that is here, because we think that it is extremely important to the history of mathematical cartography, that is, to cartography that is based on coordinates of longitude and latitude. I will also talk about maps of seas and their implication for navigation in the era before the compass, before the Crusades. And then I will talk about the Fatimid as a maritime, Mediterranean, and global empire. So if we were in a live audience, we are not. If we were in the same room, we are not. I would now ask you to try and identify which part of the world we're looking at. I'll give you a little tip. South is at the top, as in many world maps of the Islamic period, not all of them, but most of them. It says Al-Janub at the top. So I'll now give you a little help. You probably guessed a bit, but I'll give you now more help. So if south is at the top, then the mountain, this parachute mountain at the top, is the source of the Nile, known as the Mountain of the Moon since pre-Islamic times. The river, the Blue River that flows from it, is the Nile, of course, strangely flowing not only into the Mediterranean, but also to the Red Sea. Europe as an island, because the Black Sea was presumed to flow directly to the Arctic. Spain is enlarged in order to fit in what seems to be a long itinerary. Constantinople is enlarged and encircled by a brick wall. So the other red and brown masses are mountains. This is a brick wall. Asia, on the other hand, is condensed. Mecca is indicated by a yellow horseshoe. And we see here in the bottom left the wall that prevents the people of Gog and Magog from entering into the realm of the humans. This map is very strange for all sorts of reasons. But the fact that it's square is very unusual, because all other maps, mold maps from the medieval Islamic period, are generally circular or show the world as a sphere or as a globe. However, the most important bit here, the one that really raised the value of this manuscript and got everyone excited, is this bit here. Because this is a scale, and it is the earliest scale with degrees of longitude or of latitude. This is degrees of longitude, the earliest scale to found on any world map from any that is known to us from any culture. This is a scale that is finely executed. Someone clearly tried to walk through the numbers very carefully. It's only found on the western half of the map, not on the eastern side. And it generally had no functional use in this copy of the map. So whenever we tried to align particular places with longitude, we couldn't find any correlation. Moreover, the numbers here don't make sense, because the numbering going to 130 here would go to 180 in the middle of the map. But the world known to the Muslim scientists who made this was only 180 degrees. Of course, the other half, where we know the New World is, was assumed to be covered by water. So there is a scale with longitude degrees finely executed at the top of the map, but it has no bearing on the map as it is actually. The way the author describes this map is also very important, because he says this map is a map that is following the instruction of the Greeks, 2nd century scientist Ptolemy, and it describes the world, the inhabited world, from the equator in the south, that is the top, so where the scale is the equator, to 66 degrees north, which is more or less in Britain. So the map is conceived to be a map that presents a space that is defined by latitude coordinates. We know that Muslim scientists worked with tables of latitude and longitude values. They actually compiled such tables extensively since the 9th century, since Al-Khwarizmi and other scientists. And we have one author, Suharab, only one work of him is known to us, and he explains to us how you should make a world map. And it looks a bit like the map that we have here, a rectangular map with longitude and latitude on the side, and then he tells us you should simply locate each place according to longitude and latitude once you place them on the margins of your table, of your rectangle. But until we found this map in the Book of Curiosities, there was no evidence that such map was actually executed, at least in such an early date, before the later Middle Ages. I know there are many people from Cairo and Egypt joining us today. I wanted to emphasize that the role of the River Nile here in this Book of Curiosities. The map of the Nile, which is unfortunately one of the few that are damaged, it's very interesting. You can see here again the mountain of the moon at the top, and then the Nile flowing downwards, that is towards the north. But we don't have the full map. The interesting bit is that this Nile map is again very influenced by mathematical geography. It shows the equator and then climbs, which are latitudinal values or bands. And then you have, even for the Fayoum, my favorite place, you have specific longitude and latitude values indicated on the map, and there are also latitude and longitude values for some of the lakes here south of the equator. This map is very similar or reminiscent of the earliest Islamic map known to us, the map made by the mathematician Al-Khwarizmi in the 9th century. We have a copy from the 11th century that shows again climb lines and very similar layout. So how to interpret this strange map? And I'm raising what we're saying, our hypotheses or our ideas of how to interpret this map here. We think that this map was originally, in a pre-Islamic period, conceived as a mathematical map in which places were plotted. However, there was a process of adaptation and a process through which the meaning of the coordinates was lost, or the alignment with the coordinates was lost. And what we have with this hybrid map, in which some elements of the Hellenistic, Ptolemaic, one could say, mathematically conceived plotted map have been distorted, and mainly in order to fit in with the realities of 11th century Islam. So I would see this as a hybrid map, a map that is at home with the Greek legacy of mathematical geography, but is also at home with the imperial presence of the Fatimid era, of the Abbasid era. And so it brings them together in an image that is probably strange to us, but meaningful to the people who made it. So this is a good time to stop and take some questions.
As I said earlier, those of you interested in asking questions, you can do so by pressing the icon at the bottom of your screen that says participants, and then raise your hand, and we will see it. We will see the raised hands. Okay, Mahmoud, Khalifa. Neil, can you unmute Mahmoud Khalifa?
I'm attempting to do so. There we go. No. Mahmoud, if you can hear us, can you unmute from your end?
I forgot to say that you can ask questions in Arabic, and Yossi or I will translate.
Can't get Mahmoud to unmute, I'm afraid. Should we try the next one?
Yes, now I'm on. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
I'm a layman, right? So I may have some candid questions, like what's the importance of the map itself and the book that you found it in, or the book itself you're talking about? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
fine.
my question. Yeah, why is it important?
Yeah, we heard you. We heard you clearly. We heard you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Yes.
Shall I take it, Khalid?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that in this particular aspect of this map, the fact that we have an attempt 1,000 years ago to make a map that is based on mathematical plotting of coordinates of longitude and latitude is so unusual. It's so unusual that it makes us rethink what are the capabilities of the scientists a millennium ago, and also, no less importantly, to make us think why they didn't do more of them. Why did medieval scientists, medieval Muslim scientists who knew about latitude and longitude, who understood the world is round, who knew how to calculate them, but they didn't. This is the only example that we have, and it raises in a way a question of why we use coordinates and medieval people did not. And I think it is important for understanding of how medieval people before modernity, understood space around them. We are using maps all the time in a certain way. They thought of maps and used them in different ways. And I think this map and others that I'll show allow us to think of space in a different way. And this is also important for showing the achievement of this and sophistication of these scientists as well. I hope this helps as a layman.
Okay, second question is from Dalia Hussein. Dalia, if you can unmute you, yes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Again, this might be a stupid question, but is there a specific reason why the South is on the top? Like in the two cards we've seen, like Africa was on the top, and then the Nile again. Like is there a specific reason for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalia. The first thing we say always is, why not? In that the North is a convention that is generally been adopted in Europe. North is a convention adopted in Europe and is generally assumed to be after the adoption of the magnetic compass, which is directed to the north in the northern hemisphere. So this is, in a way, each culture had its own orientation. I would say so. Some of the maps here that I'll show you, not all of them are oriented to the south. This is not uniform, but world maps are almost always with south at the top. A common reason that is given is that most of these areas we are looking south, let's say towards Mecca in the Qibla, so or generally had interest in areas in the south, such as the equator and the mountains of the moon. So they were more interested in looking south than in looking north. But we have never found anyone explicitly explaining why this is so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will have more opportunity to receive questions at the end of the lecture. And if Yossi doesn't mind, shall we hand it back to you, Yossi? And
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So the next topic I want to cover is the question of sea maps and navigation. And maybe Mahmoud, you will also appreciate the importance of this for the history of going overseas. This strange bathtub-like map image is an image of the Mediterranean, but again, not as we know it, and it will be very hard for you to decipher it. What is covered, what we see here along the rims of this bathtub, of this oval, perfect oval, are first of all ports along the coast. In the north, these are ports along the coast of Byzantine-held Anatolia. So this time, Anatolia is held by the Christian Byzantines. From here, we have coast along the Fatimid-held coast of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt as far as Tripoli and Mahdia in Tunis. Western Mediterranean, Western Europe, or places in the far Maghreb are hardly represented on the rims of this map, or indeed in the center as well. The islands, the two biggest islands are in squares, Sicily and Cyprus, with longer labels. All other islands, regardless of their size, are shown as perfect circles, and there is no connection between the location of these circles on the map and the ports on the coast. On this side, the left-hand side, we have islands in the Aegean Sea. On this side, we have mostly islands around Sicily and islands like Malta in the central Mediterranean. There is no representation of islands in the Western Mediterranean, such as Mallorca or Sardinia or Corsica. But in general, this map is really focused on the eastern half of the Mediterranean, from Sicily, Mahdia, from Sicily and Tunis towards the east. And as we look at the labels, and I hope you can see the Arabic. So let's look at the Marsa of Caesarea, which says here Yasir min Jamil Riyah, but should be, we believe, Yastu min Jamil Riyah. And then we have Marsa Yafa Yastu min al Buriyas. This is a name of a wind in Greek terminology. So for each of these anchorages, and some of them are quite small, anchorages or ports, for each of them, we have protection from wind, or most of the protection from wind, the quality of the anchorage or port, sometimes sources of water. And this is even more striking in this very strange map of Cyprus. This is Cyprus as you've never seen it before. Each of these boxes is a port or an anchorage, even those in the middle. Those in the middle, clearly the person who made this map did not calculate correctly the number of squares he will need, so he put some of them in the middle of the box. But these are all coastal localities, all ports and anchorages. Cyprus in this time is under Byzantine control. It's in a way enemic territory. It's under Byzantine Christian control. So what we have here in some ways is military intelligence, is naval intelligence. Here, probably because the mapmaker had more space in his boxes, the description of each port is more expansive. There are more winds mentioned. Sometimes the size of the port. Ships of the merchants are mentioned, but this is not for merchants really. because merchants would be interested in what can you buy there, and they would not be interested in some of these anchorages which are very, very tiny. So this is information that seems really for naval officers. It's really information that its most likely source is the records of the Fatimid Navy. But the bigger question is, why does Cyprus look like that? Why does the Mediterranean look like a bathtub? Because other maps of the time did show, and we even saw in the world map, Italy is a peninsula. Greece is a peninsula. The general features are known. Why simplify the map so much? Why make it so abstract? And we argue in the book that these maps look like that precisely because they are the first Islamic maps to incorporate this material about the quality of the ports, about sometimes distances from one port to another, about protection from wind. Because they are so abstract, because they take the view of the mariner, of the person on the boat. They don't show anything that is not on the coast. In some way, there are those of you who know the Portolan maps of the later Middle Ages, where they are exactly for ship captains and navigators. So this is a version of the Portolan map, but it's so abstract because we believe this point in time, in the 11th century, the compass was not yet introduced to the Mediterranean. Navigation, from all we know, is almost always near the coast, what we call coast hagging. So in a way, the perfect line is the line that a ship captain would see, and especially a captain of a galley, a military ship, would see as he hugs the coast of the Mediterranean. So there is no benefit in a map like that in showing different peninsulas, especially large peninsulas, because it has no meaning for the navigator. The linear lines or the abstract lines are, we think, reflecting the navigation practices of the time. I want to stop now because this is kind of, I think, a bit difficult to perhaps to conceive, because the maps are so unlike what we expect from maps for navigation. So I would like to take a couple of questions about that if there's interest.
Okay, let's see who has their hands up. We have Ibrahim Al-Hadidi from last time. Ibrahim, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, Khaled, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, Yossef, Professor Yossef, for that great talk. I have a quick question. When you mentioned in the beginning how the book's divided into two sections, so there's it starts with the heavens and then it goes on to the earth, right? So it's divided into whatever is above and then whatever is below. And you said that this comes from this belief that whatever happens above affects what happens below, and you said it's also related to the Fatimids and the Ismailis kind of tradition. My question actually is, how does this link to the previous Ptolemaic and ancient Egyptian belief in as above, so below, and also how is that kind of understood in the Islamic period? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question, actually, because the author cites a lot Coptic, what he identifies as Coptic material regarding the stars. And he also cites a lot what we call Hermetic material of the prophet Hermes Idris, which is also often, we can say that this is Egyptian or Near Eastern traditions that are magical sometimes or astrological, that are linked, that were Islamized. So this, we say in the book actually, and I mean, I'm sorry that Emelie is not answering this, but she's the better expert on that. But we do say in the book that this treatise emphasizes the importance of the way Coptic material was incorporated into the Islamic scientific tradition. There are other evidences of that, but this is, I think, this book in particular shows the importance of it, and it's something that should be more widely acknowledged. I don't think it fully answers your question, but I think that's definitely that's the direction.
That was pretty much what my question actually was about. I was trying to see if it is actually related or if it's just, you know.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is Burger, MAR1. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Khaled. I wanted to ask a little bit of, you explained how this map was used for navigation, but I was wondering if you could maybe talk about how the previous map with the degrees and the scale at the top could potentially have been used. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
For navigation, what kinds of tools were being used at that time?
Yeah. So this map, I don't think it was functional. I think this is a map for, I'm sorry, I can see that the sun is in my eyes. So this map, the old map, I don't think it was used as such. I think there is a hypothesis that we raised that this map could be something that was actually, it's a replica of something that was hung in a palace, for example, for display purposes. So let's say the Fatimid Caliph, and we know that they did a very, in the 960s, before they conquered Egypt, they made a large map on silk, on very fine material, showing the ambitions. So world map. So maybe this is a replica of something that was for display in the Fatimid area, and this is also seems to be originally an attempt to capture longitude and longitude values on a map rather than just as tables. It's true, I think, that before the age of exploration, before sailing across the oceans, there is no real need for maps that are devised, that are plotted by coordinates, and therefore these maps were not produced or used, even though there was the ability to make them. So this is, I don't think there's a function for that at this point, rather than for display. As for maps such as this map of the Mediterranean, I don't think that this map specifically was used on board a ship. However, I think it was used as a way by, let's say, a naval commander or commander of a fleet to plan a raid on Byzantine ports, or to protect his fleet from Byzantine raids. So by putting these on a spatial image rather than simply on as a table, he's allowing the commander, the map maker, is allowing the commander to see that you could skip a few stations on the way, a few ports on the way, and reach the next one. The islands, however, there doesn't seem to be very successful attempt to make it functional. But the sequence of anchorages is correct, and I think it would have been useful for planning naval operations.
Okay, I think we can. I see Vivek, Mustafa, Rehan, Murtaza, and Ed all have their hands up. But let's, if you don't mind, audience, let's hand it back to Yossi, and we will have a chance to ask further questions at the end of the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last thing I want to talk about is the way this treatise helps us understand the Fatimids as a global as well as Mediterranean empire. And we've seen already that it has a map of Sicily with Palermo, it has a map of Mahdia, which I'll talk about again. And I'll also show you that the treatise shows Fatimid interest and knowledge of areas in the Indian Ocean, which perhaps we wouldn't expect. So coming back to Sicily, this is the image I've shown you already. The most central aspect of interest, or that captures your visual, is the city of Palermo, the arsenal, the chain towers blocking, from which the chain could block the port of Palermo, and the palace of the Sultan. We have in the middle here Baya al-Bukul, the Kakin. So if you want to go to Palermo and buy some vegetables, they may be millennium old, but this is the place. Many of the gates still survive. I have a pic. I went to Palermo and took a pick-up photo near to survive gate of St. Agatha. What's interesting here is that the focus is on the walls and the port and the palace. This is the visual attention. And as you can see in our construction, that is not related to our work, of a historical work on the history of Sicily, of Muslim Sicily, you can see how the image here really captures the general way in which Palermo was laid out. So this is the city. Here is a perfect circle. In reality, it was more elongated. El Khalisa is the palace of the Sultan, today known as La Calza, and you have the port here. So the map maker captured or highlighted specific features, the defenses of the city and the palace, at the expense of any other really aspects of the city. In the map of Mahdia, again, Mahdia is the old capital, is the first Fatimid capital established in the early 10th century. On a small peninsula projecting into the sea. So what we have here is again showing us the harbor, which is shown here as being the entrance to the harbor apparently was covered by an arch, which was not uncommon. You have two palaces of Fatimid imams, the walls themselves, and the impressive two gates or twin gates of the city. And it's shown as if it is an island, even though in reality we know Mahdia is a peninsula. And if I compare it with a Google Map view, bird's eye view of Mahdia today, of the old town, of course, you can see how the harbor captures the artificial harbor here. The palaces of the imams of the Fatimid are not extant anymore, but they stood here. And the gate looks different today, but it's around here. So this is really, again, an attempt not to be realistic, but to capture some key features of the town, key urban features, and emphasize them visually. When we look at these two maps together, you can see how the visual emphasis is on defenses, on port, on political authority. There are no mosques here. Markets are mentioned in Palermo, but not shown visually. So as in maps that we know today, a map maker here wanted to make a point, and the point was, look, these are the impregnable Fatimid assets in the central Mediterranean. We will hold them. We have the walls, we have the port, we have the palace. And these maps are a wonderful illustration of the way the Fatimids understood themselves as a maritime Mediterranean power, because Mahdia and Palermo are the two most important commercial ports in the Mediterranean. We know this from the Geniza, the contemporary Geniza document. So their hold on these two key commercial ports is the visual focus of this part of the treatise. And I think it reflects the Fatimids' understanding of themselves. Unfortunately, within half a century at most after these maps were made, both Palermo and Mahdia were lost. So it's not enough to draw nice maps. You need actually to build fortifications. But this captures a moment in time where the Fatimids were really trying to hold to these two key assets. But we even move further. It's not only the Mediterranean. This is one of the strangest maps, and the last map I'll talk about in detail. This map is supposedly the map of the Indus River. Actually, it starts in the river here starts in Tibet, in Jubal. This should be Jubal Tibat. It's written incorrectly. And it goes through central India, in what is certainly the Ganges River. But only here it's the Indus Valley to modern Pakistan, with the two key Muslim city-states of Multan and Mansura in modern Pakistan in the Indus Valley. Both of them were Ismaili principalities by the end of the 10th century, by the 970s, and they were loyal to the Fatih. What you see here are two straight itineraries, one from Multan in the Indus Valley towards Kannauj near the capital. It says capital of India. This is a Hindu empire, from Multan to Kannauj, and then from Kannauj along the river to the gate of China. If we look at this, we can see here something going from Multan towards the Ganges. So crossing the border between Muslim India and Hindu-ruled India at that time was around here. So crossing into the capital of the Hindu Empire. And from there, incredibly, from Kannauj on the Ganges, probably through Lhasa towards Jian in China. What this shows is the road to China was no longer central. The Silk Road to China, passing through Dunhuang in the north, was no longer central. We know this from other sources. And this is a remarkable and a very surprising confirmation that for this period, 11th century, perhaps 10 and 9th, we have a route to China through Tibet, what's called sometimes the Musk Road. For a Fatimid historian, I think the key thing to think about is how does our author know all this? How does he know about the route from what is from central India to China, areas that are not under Muslim control? So clearly, the presence, Ismaili presence in the Sindh, in the Indus Valley, in Multan and Mansura was very important. But also we have here, I think, evidence, and we have other points in the manuscript which show that this was part of the Ismaili network of collecting information and of missionaries sent out as merchants, often to the farthest lands. So I think that this ability to collect information on the route from India to China is part of the impressive achievement of the Ismaili missionary network. All in all, I think Fatimid global history benefit here both from a new understanding of how Mediterranean was divided between East and West, that Fatimid Egypt was closer to Byzantine Anatolia than it was to Muslim Spain. It clearly had much more knowledge about Anatolia than about Spain. The fact that we have a route from India to China passing through Tibet, and something I have not talked about, but this is also the information about East Africa, the Gulf of Aden, which explains some of the wonderful Fatimid rock crystal which came from Madagascar, and the amount of knowledge in the map of the Indian Ocean on East Africa is astonishing. I don't have time to talk about it today. I want to finish with who was the author. We don't know his name. He clearly was a Fatimid subject and probably had access to the records of the Fatimid Navy. It's pretty certain that he had some association with the Ismaili Shia missionary network. But I don't think he was a merchant. I don't think he was a scholar. I think he was a map maker. And what is so attractive about this manuscript is his profound interest and confidence in the ability of maps to convey messages. Most of the text we have from the medieval period do not use images to describe plots of land. This guy believed, and I think it's a guy, pretty sure, this author believed that through a map that is not dependent on text, you could convey information in a legible way. Maybe you're not convinced, maybe it's not, these maps were not especially clear to you, but he believed unusually that maps can convey a message without words. And this is unusual for a medieval author and a great achievement. To conclude and showing you just the range of images from that, this treaty is really one of the greatest achievements of medieval mapmaking in any culture. It is also a remarkable part of the story of Islamic civilization, and too often we divorce the achievements of Islamic science from the culture that produced them. Islamic maps often get no attention in surveys of Islamic history, and even when they are shown, they are not always explained. I think it's because we tend to view Islamic civilization through the prism of religion and faith, and these abstract diagrams do not necessarily tell us anything about God directly. But what could be more foundational to any culture than the manner in which it's conceived of the sky and the earth? And we hope to have shown that this is the rediscovery of the sea as an integral part of that civilization, of the role of Greek science and its adaptation here, and the power of cosmographic and cartographic images in a culture that is too often reduced to text. So the Book of Curiosities, we hope, opens an unmediated window to a medieval Islamic view of the world. Thank you very much for your attention. A good time for questions. I hope we left enough time.
Okay, before questions, I think we owe you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Which we can do by pressing the reactions button at the bottom. Okay, we have a few hands being raised already. Let's start with the first one, Vivek Gupta. You can unmute yourself, Vivek, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that lecture. And I just want to congratulate you and Professor Savage Smith on the book. I work on related material from a few centuries after this manuscript was made, but material that's made in India, cosmographies and related books of maps and wonder books. And I was really struck by your, I would like for you to talk to us a little bit about how you see the Kitab Qira'at al-Uyun in terms of its genre. You spoke, I know you go into this in the book, but I think for all of us, it would be very useful to talk about its genre, not necessarily because it's both cosmography, it's also cartographic, it also occupies a realm of popular knowledge, which I think is very interesting that you brought up with the markets. So I think that's something that's interesting for you to talk about. As an aside, the central India at this period was already considered part of the Ummah. So that's not necessarily surprising, and I wouldn't divide it as going from a Muslim part of the world to a Hindu part of the world at all. And I think that kind of language is a bit, it's problematic and needs to be thought about further. But just some questions about genre I think would be really important for all of us to hear about, or your observations and working on this wonderful manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the point about India. I'm not an expert, and this is an important way to imagine how an Ismaili author approached Indian material. It's very interesting. There's a section on astrology, on the birth of astrology in India in the first volume, which Emelie talks about in the chapter about astrology, which is fascinating. Adaptation, probably read adaptation of Indian material, but not otherwise attested. About the genre, an excellent question. I would say this. Emelie is very, and I think this is an important point that you made, the astronomical and astrological parts are not technical. So this is a book that appeals to what seems to be the popular non-technical understanding of astronomy and astrology. There are no calculations there, and this is seems to be what is available as on the market, and this, I think, is a relatively rare evidence of that. Most of what has survived is more technical. So this is, and also I think the way it is very methodical in going from the stars through the planets to the comets, this is all quite unusual. In terms of the geographical material, what I would like to emphasize is, in some ways, it is similar to, let's say, Ibn Hawqal al-Muqaddasi or Istahri, because it starts with a world map and then moves on to regions. But unlike the Balkhi school, the earlier geographers, he's not working by the logic of provinces, territories, but by the logic of water. So this is the big structural change. It is a geography. The second book is a geography in some ways similar to what we would expect, but it's organized by seas, river, islands or peninsulas, Jazair, and then other waterways, rivers, and so forth. And also unusual is that some of the maps are not accompanied by text. So there's much more information on the maps than there is the text, and this is because this is clearly a map maker who believes in his craft more than in the power of text. Even the Marvel sections is unusual. There are already Marvel memorabilia sections before in geographical literature, but the way he organizes the memorabilia by types of marvels rather than by geographical areas is also unusual. So it builds on earlier genres, and I think there's a clear influence of Ibn al-Khwarizmi in some aspects. But this is the synthesis is very different, and a lot of innovations.
Okay, before we go on with the further questions, just an informational point, because I've been receiving some questions about where one can view the original book, the manuscript, and as some of you have already mentioned, it is available for view on the website of the Bodleian Library of Oxford. So you can actually read it very clearly, you can take pictures of it, it's available for study, and this is one of the main purposes of purchasing the book, as Professor Savage Smith says in the introduction of her book, of the introduction of this book, that this is one of the main purposes of purchasing it, to make it available for study and dissemination of knowledge, which is something not practiced in other parts of the world. Okay, so next question is Mustafa Pishuri. Mustafa, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Hi there. Thank you for this opportunity. and this was a very informational and enjoyable lecture. I'm from Pakistan, and my question was that you talked about the rectangular map that had some coordinates that were, you said that they were lost in the process of making the map, or at some point they were lost. My question is that you said that they were sourced from Hellenistic sources.
Yeah.
My question is that, is there any proof or evidence that Hellenistic calculations at that time were better than in that map, or were they, so how exactly do we navigate through that? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. So we have information from a Syriac, an author who's writing in Syriac under the Umayyads. And he's describing a map that he's working with, which is, he claims is from Ptolemy, but we think it's not me, it's other historians of maps. I think it's not the original map of Ptolemy, if Ptolemy in the 2nd century ever made one. But it's some map that was made in late antiquity, probably before Islam. And this map, I'm not saying it was better, but it seems to be a map that in which these places were perhaps plotted, or at least there was a mathematical logic to it. And most importantly, Khwarizmi himself, Khwarizmi, the great mathematician, when he writes his geographical book, he starts it by saying, this is why I took out istakhrajtu min from Ptolemy. So he's saying, I'm taking, and at some point he's saying, I'm looking, a couple of points, I'm looking at a map, and I'm deriving the coordinates from the map. So we think of coordinates as something that we can plot through GPS, but they had, for them it was a complete guess. The fact, and I think it's very important to say that, the fact that you put number or something doesn't say it's true. So they were just making up coordinates, both the Ptolemy and the Muslim medieval scientists. Some cases were making up guesses of coordinates. They couldn't. Definitely, longitude was practically impossible to get anything without eclipses and a lot of luck. In that sense, we have what we have here is, I would say, people using maps and deriving coordinates from them, and vice versa, somehow, in a process which I'm not sure yet. But perhaps rather than saying these are better than others, I think this particular map here shows is the ability, is the seamless transition between late antique science. And this is how I perceive it.
Okay. So
thank you very much.
Thank you. Is it safe to say that they were making it up as they went?
Yeah, some of these places, there's no mountain of the moon, but all the Muslim scientists tell us exactly what are the longitude and latitude, and many other mythical places. So clearly some of it were made up. Not some not.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Next question is Rihan Zaidi.
Thank you for the fascinating talk, Dr. Rapaport. My question is, I wonder if you could reflect on I'm a layperson, by the way, so looking at some of the maps you showed us, for example, there is a lot of detail in the sort of Mediterranean dominion of the Fatimids, and then there is a level of abstraction as it moves out. The more maps move out to sort of areas that the Fatimids did not control directly. But I was wondering, two things struck me. One was obviously the mention you made about the Nile draining out into the Red Sea, and then perhaps also beyond that, at the extremities of the map, you had a couple of things which are rather than fact, they are sort of mythology. So you've got the Gog Magog, description towards the towards China, and that there is another annotated island, perhaps referred to as in the world map as the island of jewels. I was wondering if you have any reflections on what is sort of the known world versus inclusion of mythological references in the map.
Yeah.
What's the sort of balance there?
That great. Yeah, and actually it follows up from what Mustafa just asked, because in a way, what you see on this map here, for example, the wall against Gog and Magog, the sun, and then the island of the jewels, and the mountain of the moon, as well as yellow sand dunes from which a western arm of the Nile emerges. All of these are taken from the Greeks. So the Greeks, the elements of mythology are taken from Greek scientists. And in that world map, the other place names, which are all cities or towns, are Islamic, are consistent with the 11th century. So as far perhaps as China, and definitely in those, if you look at this map, so if you look at Italy, Spain, of course, these are places that are known to the Muslims. Certainly, this is Iraq, of course, but part of India, road to China, of course, North Africa, these are places that are known. The mythical elements are all taken from the pre-Islamic tradition. Gog and Magog, of course, appear also in the Islamic tradition, but they predate Islam. So I think that complements what Mustafa asked earlier.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ed Cogill.
Hi there, Yossef. Yossi, that's a really fascinating talk. The last couple of questions have kind of trod on mine a little bit, but I think what I'm interested, or what I'd like you to talk a little bit about, is the selection criteria for the places. So in your bathtub map of the Mediterranean, I think you made a quite convincing point that in an era before the compass, it's actually more practical to have a straight line, effectively an itinerary. And I just wondered if the writing and the annotation would support the idea of kind of that essentially this is an itinerary that is pretty similar to what you'd find in like Ibn Hawkal or something over land. So do you get, do the places that are plotted along the Mediterranean coast accord to certain distances? Is it a marhala between each port? Or is that kind of information given, which would really kind of support your idea that this is quite a practical, the bathtub map, for all that it looks to us like it's completely, unlike a real map, is actually the most useful of the maps. Yeah, I had two, but maybe that one is fine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, unfortunately, there are no distances between adjacent ports. But I must say, in some of these areas, the distances are very, very short. But yeah, there are no, so that unfortunately for me. However, there are distances sometimes between ports that are not adjacent. So he tells you that it takes a day and a night to sail from Cyprus, from a particular port in Cyprus, to a port in Anatolia, or to a port in Latakia, or to Latakia, or from Alexandria, that it takes a day, another day, day and night to sail to Silt, which is probably a mistake. But so he kind of gives the commander, rather than adjacent ports, which probably I assume they would have known, or it was too close, perhaps, that's my explanation. It wasn't as important, but it does give, if you want to do a shortcut through Cyprus, or you have a long a distance further, for example, the Gulf of Sirt, that you can go away from the coast, then you can do that. Ibn Hawkal doesn't have maritime itineraries. The maritime itineraries that are parallel to that are in al-Bakri and al-Idrisi, and they are very similar.
Thanks, that's really useful. The other question, you kind of already talked about it with the fact that the distant, far off places are taken from Hellenistic tradition. And yes, I mean, just my thought was thinking about reading Yaqut's Mu'jam al-Buldan, where he discusses Ptolemy in the introduction and says most of these places, we can't tell where these names no longer exist. They're just nonsense. So it's not that useful. And I wondered if those names actually make it onto the map as well, whether you can identify the majority of places on the world map, or if there are place names coming in from the Hellenistic tradition which are on these maps, which actually would have been unknown in the period in which it's written.
No, actually, all the names are clearly consistent. Many of them are taken from Ibn Hawkal, actually. So he actually took Ibn Hawkal, sometimes literally, and put them on the map in a way that Ibn Hawkal did not. So unlike Idrisi, who does incorporate all sorts of strange material, here it's only these mythical elements on the edges are included. Well, on the world map here, the 400 place names are really all consistent with the 11th century. Probably all of them did exist in reality in the 11th century.
So it is a kind of melding of the Balkhi tradition with the coordinates, right? That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, I just put information about where you can buy the book if you're interested. I think this is important. We're not in this business to make money, but it's nice to have one's book actually acquired by people who are interested. So I just put the link to the publisher's website. So next is Yossef Umurtwala.
Yeah, can you hear me, Professor?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for such an insightful seminar, Professor. Actually, I just wanted to ask you about the author of the book. There are some sources, actually, I don't quite remember, but then one is Farhad Daftari, who actually says that the author of the Book of Curiosities can also be, as you mentioned, that someone to do with the missionary of the Fatimids. So it is plausible that it could be Dai Nijaburi, because he is also an astronomer and a mathematician, and he also has similar works on maps. So could you, Professor, ascertain that it is Dai Nishaburi or someone else probably? Are there any possibilities who can be the author of this book? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yossef. I don't remember why we didn't support Nishapuri, but we think it is someone who was part of the missionary network. I don't know if Nishapuri fits with the dates. I can check that. We didn't adopt Nishapuri. I think partly, by the way, I would be interested in if he has works on maps. But I think partly we think that Nishapuri is too sophisticated. He knows too much math and too much astronomy, and the guy who wrote this didn't understand much. It seems in terms of technical aspects of astronomy. So that's part of the reason why we think this is someone lower down on the scale.
Okay, next we have Ali Ashgar Lamu.
Assalamu alaikum, Prof. Hello. My question was that when we study these maps, when we see these maps, we tend to find the underlying images. Sometimes we tend to find a image of bird or image of caterpillar. So, is there any significance of was the cartographer had that in mind before making these maps to connotate something?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, what they had in mind, we think it's not a symbolic meaning, but it's just about how to copy a map. Before print, how do you copy a map precisely? and what Al-Khwarizmi tells us, and what El-Idrisi tells us, and this guy is not saying, but I think is part of what he's doing, is making abstract forms that are easy to copy. So if someone will copy, and someone did copy this book, and several copies were made, how to make it easy for the copies. So if you make the Red Sea like a beak of a bird, and the Indian Ocean like a bird, as is common, Al-Muqaddasi actually tells us this is the way to do it, and that way you can always reproduce a familiar form. So I think the issue here is not symbolic. Actually, there are other map historians like Karen Pinto who think there are symbolic elements in these images. But in my view, the key here is how to copy most efficiently. And if you create a nomenclature of, or a language of symbols, in the way we know on our maps, we know how a speed camera looks like, an icon for a speed camera. So in the same way, they have specific icons for specific features that allows them to copy it more easily and to be recognizable or legible for users. Yeah.
So we have some references of that someone has referred to the maps that it looks like that, or some region looks like that. We have the references.
Yes, Muqaddasi talks about it, Khwarizmi talks about it, and Idrisi talks about it. I think it's somewhere in our book, in the chapter on the rectangular world map, I believe.
Thank you.
Next, we have Murtaza Marla.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah, how are you? Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. My question is actually related to cartography. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the word correctly, but do we have a comparative analysis? Comparative analysis of, you mentioned that this map is from maybe the late 10th century, the early 11th century, right?
Yeah, middle of 11th century, yeah.
Okay, so do we have a comparative analysis of, because at that time we have the Umayyads, we have the Abbasids, and north we have the Byzantine Empire. So those, any maps which were created in those dynasties, do we have any comparative analysis maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, I would like, actually, I expected something like that. So something I prepared in advance. So I prepared, this is a map that was prepared by Ibn Hawkal. And this is a world map that is typical of 10th century Abbasid production. And these are the most sophisticated. The Byzantines, we don't have any relevant maps from that period as far as I know. Umayyads, too early. But for Abbasid Baghdad, this is 10th century. And you see this is a world map where, first of all, it's different in that it's more, the world map is more abstract. And you see there are no place names, but only regions, each divided by a box. And Ali, I think the previous, one of the previous people who asked, talked about the beak of the bird. So you see here the beak of the bird. So this is a typical circular world map from the Abbasid period. It perhaps makes more sense to us, but it has no mathematical geography. It doesn't have coordinates, or it doesn't view the world in such a way. And you can see there are no icons, unlike the maps of Sicily that we've seen, or the map of Mahdia with palaces and mimetic elements of images of buildings, etc. We don't have anything like that. It's unusual, at least.
So that those maps are we can consider them path breaking. They are quite unique.
Definitely, the Book of Curiosities is unique. It's path-breaking because we didn't know about them before. I think these are parallel traditions, and in a way, the maps of the Book of Curiosities were very relevant to the day and age in which they were formed in 11th century Egypt, in that part of the Mediterranean, before the Crusades, before the compass, in a Fatimid empire that was very based on the sea, on maritime networks. And once the Crusades came and the Fatimid lost, these maps lost their relevance in many ways. So I don't think they are better they are not better than this map of Ibn Hawkal, not at all. I just think it shows the possibilities, and it tells us about the Fatimids and about the possibilities that they had at that time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Hugh Goddard.
Thanks very much for a fascinating seminar. Can I ask whether it's clear where the Bodleian manuscript was produced and what its later history is? Is there any evidence of its own biography, as it were, until it reached Christie's, which I'm sure is a fascinating story in itself?
Yeah. So I would like to say, first of all, I don't know where it was before it reached Christie. I simply don't know. I really don't know. Probably somewhere in Europe. That's all. After, it seems that it was lost when the original was lost when the Fatimid libraries were looted, either in 1068 or when Saladin sold many of the books in the Fatimid libraries. And then it seems that this manuscript was made just after Saladin took over, somewhere in Egypt or Syria, probably in Syria. I'm saying that because the copies that we have later, that are not made from this copy, but perhaps from the original or from another variant, are made in 16th century, 17th century Christians in Syria. So there's another set of those. We have, for this manuscript, as you've seen perhaps in the beginning, there are Ottoman ownership stamps from the 17th century. Perhaps later, I don't remember, but yeah, not very recent. Thank you.
Okay, Adham Nadim, nice to see you, Adham.
Yes, nice to see you too, Khalid, and it's you're missed in Cairo. I'd like to ask a quick question. Now, obviously, these people at this period knew where these cities were in relation to each other, and it's always puzzled me, even though they had some not basic, more than basic navigational skills, why the earliest mosques in North Africa always, when they came to put the Qibla direction, was pointing south. It could have been south or it could have been east, but it never came southeast.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a topic that is raised in 12th century by Egyptian authors. There's a very, very nice manuscript in the Bodleian, discussed by David King and others. From the 12th century, people begin to say, well, all our early mosques are not oriented correctly, both in Egypt and West and North Africa. What were the reasons for the way early mosques were not done like that? I don't know. It's too early for me. I think in many cases, the early mosques clearly were not done by astronomical calculations, and that caused some consternation for later scholars who realized that this is not the correct. And later mosques are done so, and especially in Isfahan. You may know, in the 16th century, there was an order to demolish all the mosques so that the Qibla will be correctly oriented. It's never been applied, but this is something that people were bothered about.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Hani Taha. And if you can unmute yourself. Okay, we can go down the list to the last person with the hand up, Abdili Mugo.
Hi, Dr. Rapoport. My question is with regard to the preamble text just before the map of Mehdiya, and thanks to the Oxford Library, we can see the text very clearly. So I was wondering if you could weigh in on the name used by the author. It refers to the Imam Mehdi as Abi Abdullah al-Mahdi, opposed to the Ubaidullah al-Mahdi, which is how the Fatimid dynasty is popularly recognized. So my question is, can this text be a turning point in the re-identification of the Fatimids as a whole?
I don't remember that. Thank you for raising this. I doubt it, just because this is a copy made. This copy was made in the 1200s, and therefore it first needs to. We can check in the edition. I don't have it with me at the moment. Whether the later unillustrated copies made in the 16th century from an independent version have the same reading. It may be a copyist mistake in the early 13th century, so it's after a century and a half later. I don't think he is not very knowledgeable about Mahdi. I think much of what he says is known from other sources, so I don't think he's an original source there. But I am not an expert on early Fatimid history, and I may be missing here the nuances of the names of the early cages. So I appreciate following it up. I would recommend checking the edition if you can get hold of this. The edition we made, because there we compared with the other manuscript. You can see whether this is consistent for the manuscripts.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at. Yes, of course. Tariq Swaylan had his hand up apparently, and I'm glad that you're reminding me. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, Khaled. Yes, we miss you in Cairo, although I'm in Paris, but we still miss you, as Adam says. Thank you so much for this beautiful lecture and eye-opener. Thank you. About the lecture, I've been thinking about ever since you mentioned the Mountains of the Moon, and I've always remembered the movie and John Speaks and Richard Burton and all of that. And now I find Mountains on the Moon on Idrisi and on this map.
Yeah.
Was Idrisi accurate? I mean, did he take mountains? I mean, was Idrisi following or copying from this map? Was it a source for his work, and how does it relate to this wonderful map?
Yep. The relationship with Idrisi is a whole new thing that I avoided in order not to take too much time. But we have. So first of all, Idrisi, if you look at his Idrisi map here, let me put my glasses so I can see it clearly.
Yeah.
If you see Idrisi's map here, he has the Mountain of the Moon, and Idrisi is the first one to indicate that he says that from the lakes in the source of the Nile, one arm goes to the Mediterranean and another goes to the Atlantic Ocean. He's the first one to describe it in such a way. This is wrong, as we know, but he seems to be trying to integrate an idea that is found in the Book of Curiosities, which talks about a western tributary of the Nile coming from some sand dunes in West Africa. So he seems to combine all sorts of ideas and make this western arm of the Nile, which then actually infiltrated into European cartography as well. Strangely enough, the Book of Curiosities, which was made originally before Idrisi, has a map that is clearly the same. This caused a lot of problems for us, and also a disagreement between me and Emelie, the only thing we really disagree on. Emelie thinks this shows that this Idrisi world map actually was not made by Idrisi, but is earlier and was added to Idrisi manuscripts, and that this map is earlier and was a tradition that existed before Idrisi. I think this map was added when the copy was made around 1200, was added because Idrisi had already made this. You see the colors in this map in the Book of Curiosities are different, and I think that it's placed arbitrarily. So the technical discussion about it. The point is that this is a very similar map, and it also has a reference to this western arm of the Nile, it seems. So this is the big difference here. Idrisi is the first one, and the question is whether he did see this map separately or not. We're not sure. But it's a whole different Pandora box.
So, but you say that this map was based on Ptolemaic maps. Do I understand that? And if so, then they knew about mountains of the moon then, in the Ptolemaic period.
Well, the Ptolemaic, the scientist Ptolemy in the 2nd century, I think it dates from before him even. The mountain of the moon is taken like this island of the jewel that we mentioned, or are elements that are taken from Greek knowledge, but other elements are not. So Idrisi, I think, is more accepting of these elements coming from Greek science. So some of the place name on the Idrisi map are archaic, and some of the names are completely singular to him. So in Siberia, he has the El Ard El Muntina, the stinking land, or the big. So Idrisi has his own method of doing things, in the incorporated material that we sometimes perhaps European tradition, not textual. He rarely uses the textual European sources or Latin sources, but he had a lot of European informants, so maybe he got some of it from them. The mountain of the moon he got from the Islamic tradition that adopted it from the Ptolemaic. So it's all a mix-up. There's no, you can never say what is Islamic, what is Greek. The earlier friend Vivek told me it's not right to say Hindu and Muslim in India, and probably it's the same here. We're making boundaries when they did not have them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any raised hands anymore.
There's Adnan Khaled has just put his hand up.
Okay, then go ahead, please.
Adnan, can you unmute? Has he got it? Got it.
Yes, hello, hi. Thank you very much for your talk, which was very fascinating. My question really relates to the title of the book, غرائب الفنون وملح العيون. And as you know, medieval scholars placed a lot of emphasis on the choice of words they selected in naming their work. And that also relates to one of the points which you made, which was that these maps highlighted political and military positions rather than what was perhaps cultural or social. So how does that connect with the title, and does the author himself talk about the reason for naming his work as such, or is there any light which you can shed?
So that's a difficult question for me to answer. I don't have a perfect answer. He does refer to the words غرائب and ajaib in the context of, as you would expect, of, when you contemplate creation, you can see God's hand. And this is something that Ikhwan al-Safa also say, use the same combination of ajaib or araib to say that you can contemplate creation, you can contemplate nature and see God's work. So that's where he uses it, but he doesn't explain the title. There are not many mirabilia. There are mirabilia in the end, wonders, but it's not the ajaib. This is not the focus of the treatises, and there are no visuals there. There are no images. So this is Gharaib al-Funun. So I think he treats astrology as a fun, as a science, and perhaps that's what he meant. I have more certainty about Mullah al-Uyun, and I think these, what you see here in front of you, these are the Mullah al-Uyun.
Mm.
The emphasis on the images is lovely things to look at. And I think that's why some people enjoy the talk today, not just my explanations, but actually looking at these captivating images and the colors and the aesthetics of it. So I think that's his explanation for Mullah Haloyan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have maybe one last question by, unless I see further names, further hands. Murtaza Mullah, sorry.
I'm sorry, it's just a follow-up question on what you just mentioned, the Ikhwanus Safa. I think that was written about maybe 2 centuries prior, if I'm not mistaken. So how does this work compare with the Ikhwanus Safa? If maybe you can just talk about that for a moment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think Ikhwan Safa is written, so it's written probably in Basra. I think it's a couple of centuries before, as far as I remember. There's no direct quotation in this Book of Curiosities of the Ikhwan Safa. So there's no evidence that the author here used the Rasail. There are, I would say, some similarities in the way they approach the topic. They also they have a separate book for the heavens, for astronomy, a separate book for geography, and there's similarity in the material, but there's no direct quotation. There's nothing that can pinpoint that it's exactly the same. But I think it's part of the same intellectual milieu, one could say. But there's a problem with the Rasail Ikhwan Safa.
I lost the last sentence.
Yeah, so,
could you repeat that?
Yeah. I don't think we have evidence that the Ikhwan Safa, how much they were read. I'm not an expert, but as far as I remember, there's a problem. We don't know whether they were in Egypt at all. But definitely, this treatise, there's no direct quotation from Ikhwan Safa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yossi, may I ask you to stop sharing the screen?
Yeah.
So that we bring this to a conclusion. Yes. Again, if I don't see any further hands for any last questions, I'm just looking. Okay, so you see, this has been fascinating, and as you can see from the level of enthusiasm, people are glued to it. And just before I hand over everything to Paul Anderson, who's I can see here, who's the incoming director of the Center for Islamic Studies. I'm stepping down because I'm off next year. But the main thing I wanted to say is that this lecture has been recorded and it will be uploaded, as I mentioned in the chat, on the website of the Center for Islamic Studies. So you can watch it later on if you're interested. The book can be consulted, the original book can be consulted, the manuscript in the website of the Bodleian Library. The book that we're talking about can be purchased. It's available for sale. And it just remains for me to thank Yossi Rapaport very much. It's a pleasure to listen to you. It's unfortunate that Professor Emelie Savage-Smith could not join us. I see her here, but she could not make a presentation, but it's a pleasure to see her name on the screen. Thank you so much, Yossi, and let us end with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. And really, I remind that this is we wouldn't have had this conversation without Emelie, without the determination, first of all, to bring this to light and the expertise to recognize the importance of it. And thank you all for joining in. Thank you for enthusiasm. Really, I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Bye.